Emma Carter's life changes forever when a shocking accusation in the Reynolds mansion leads to an unexpected revelation. She is more connected to the powerful family than she ever imagined. This is a story of buried secrets, resilience, and the fight to build a new life from the shadows of the past. Follow Emma as she uncovers the truth, navigates broken relationships, and finds hope in places she never thought possible. If you love stories filled with mystery, emotional twists, and the strength to start anew, hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's begin this unforgettable journey. The sun had barely begun to rise over Boston, casting a soft amber glow across the narrow streets. Emma Carter wrapped her thin coat around her as she made her way through the city's waking hum. The rhythmic clatter of delivery trucks and the occasional distant bark of a dog weaving through the air. This was her time of reflection, the brief moments before the world demanded everything she had. Ahead loomed the Reynolds mansion, its towering stone facade as imposing as ever. The estate was a masterpiece of old money, ornate iron gates, sprawling ivy that clung stubbornly to the stone, and windows so tall they seemed to reach the heavens. Emma had been working there for 3 years, a silent witness to the elegance and secrets it held. She passed through the service entrance, already bustling with the staff's early morning preparations. The kitchen was filled with the sharp scent of lemon polish and the soft crackle of frying bacon. Rosie, the head cook, nodded to Emma with a warm smile, her round face flushed from the stove's heat. "Morning, Emma," Rosie said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're here early again." Emma nodded as she slipped off her coat. "Morning, Rosie. I couldn't sleep." Rosie's expression softened, a silent acknowledgement of the burden they all knew Emma carried. "Well, there's plenty to keep you busy today," she said, her voice both practical and kind. "Mrs. Reynolds has another luncheon planned." Emma felt a twinge of anxiety at the mention of Victoria Reynolds. The woman was beautiful and sharp as a blade, with eyes that seemed to see every flaw, every imperfection. Victoria's presence turned even the most mundane day into a tightrope walk. And Emma had learned early on that one misstep could send her life into chaos. She set to work dusting the grand dining room, her movements automatic, polished through years of practice. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's crystal light, each chair perfectly aligned. Emma's reflection caught her eye, faintly mirrored in the polished surface. Dark curls tucked under a simple headscarf, eyes that carried a weight far beyond her 24 years. As she worked, voices drifted in from the hall, growing louder as they approached. Emma's pulse quickened. It was Victoria, accompanied by the crisp click of her heels on the marble floor and the murmur of Mr. Reynolds' deeper voice. She kept her eyes on her work, her heart hammering as the couple's conversation grew clearer. "I don't care, Jonathan," Victoria snapped, her tone cold. "That necklace is irreplaceable, and I won't rest until it's found." Jonathan Reynolds sighed, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone used to such confrontations. "We'll talk to the staff, but accusing them without proof isn't going to help." "Proof?" Victoria scoffed. "What more proof do we need? It was there last night and gone this morning." Emma's hands trembled as she set down the dust cloth, her mind racing. She hadn't seen the necklace, but she knew which one they meant. The sapphire pendant that Victoria wore to every significant event. A jewel that could fund Emma's mother's medical treatment for years. The voices receded, but the tension they left behind was palpable. Emma glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. The day had only just begun, and already the mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. By late morning, the entire staff had been assembled in the main hall, a rare and unsettling occurrence. The room buzzed with uneasy whispers as the housemaids, cooks, and gardeners exchanged worried glances. Emma stood near the back, hands folded tightly in front of her, as she tried to keep her breathing steady. Victoria stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, her posture rigid and eyes like daggers. Jonathan was beside her, his expression unreadable, a shadow of concern flickering across his face. The hall fell silent as Victoria raised a hand. "A valuable piece of jewelry has gone missing," she said, her voice clear and cutting. a necklace that holds great personal and financial value. Until it is found, no one will leave this house." A murmur swept through the crowd, the uneasy shifting of feet and darting eyes. Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. The consequences of such a theft were unimaginable. Even the whisper of suspicion could ruin a servant's life. "We will be conducting searches of personal belongings," Victoria continued, "and I expect full cooperation. If anyone has any knowledge of this, speak now." Silence. The weight of it pressed down on Emma, making it hard to breathe. No one spoke. No one dared to. "Very well," Victoria said, her tone tinged with disappointment and threat. She turned and walked away, Jonathan trailing behind her, with a glance over his shoulder that caught Emma's eye for just a moment. As the staff dispersed, Emma felt a tap on her arm. Rosie stood there, her brow creased with worry. "Keep your head down, Emma," she whispered. "Things like this never end well for us." Emma nodded, the knot in her stomach tightening. She returned to her duties, but the fear was a constant drumbeat, echoing in the back of her mind. The day stretched out in a haze of anxiety, each moment burdened with the weight of uncertainty. Emma worked her way through her tasks, trying to ignore the prickling sensation that ran up her spine every time she caught someone glancing at her. She polished the silver candlesticks in the drawing room, her reflection distorted and blurred in the curved metal. She couldn't shake Rosie's warning. "Keep your head down." But how was she supposed to do that when suspicion was already swirling around like a storm cloud? The thought of losing her job, the only thing keeping her and her mother from sinking deeper into financial ruin, was terrifying. By the time her shift ended, the gray light outside had deepened to twilight. Emma pulled on her coat, the chill of the early evening air biting at her skin as she left through the side entrance. The streets were alive with the hum of evening traffic, the warm glow of streetlights casting long shadows on the cobblestones. Emma's apartment was a small second-story unit in a narrow brick building that had seen better days. She paused at the bottom of the steps, taking a moment to compose herself before going inside. The last thing she wanted was to worry her mother more than necessary. "Emma!" Her mother's voice called out the moment she stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile tea, the scent mingling with the chill that Emma had brought in from outside. Marie was sitting in her usual spot on the worn couch, a blanket draped over her thin legs and a book open in her lap. Emma forced a smile. "Hey, Mom, how was your day?" Marie's eyes, still bright despite her pale skin, searched Emma's face. "The same as always. But what about you? You look tired." Emma sat next to her, the familiar creak of the springs under her weight grounding her. "Just a long day," she said, avoiding the worry in her mother's gaze. "There's some trouble at work, but it'll pass." Marie's brow furrowed. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Emma hesitated. She didn't want to tell Marie about the missing necklace or the way Victoria had made the accusation sound like a death sentence. But Marie knew her too well. "Something valuable went missing at the house," Emma admitted, trying to sound casual. "Mrs. Reynolds isn't happy." Marie reached for Emma's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Emma, you can't let them blame you for this. You've worked so hard, and you're honest. They have to see that." Emma's throat tightened, and she looked down at their joined hands. "I hope so, Mom. I really do." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the faint creak of the radiator as it struggled to warm the room. Emma wanted to say more, to share the fear that gnawed at her, but the weariness in her mother's eyes held her back. Instead, she offered a weak smile and changed the subject. "Are you hungry? I can make us something light." Marie shook her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just rest. You look like you need it." Emma nodded and stood, moving to the small kitchen where she could still see her mother from the corner of her eye. She set a kettle on the stove and let the rhythm of her actions, filling the teapot, fetching the mismatched mugs, calm her nerves. But even in the quiet of their home, the shadow of the mansion and its looming consequences felt closer than ever. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the clouds, casting a dull, muted light over Boston. Emma woke early, unable to shake the unease that had settled over her like a blanket. The accusation, the tension in the mansion, it all felt like a noose tightening around her. As she moved through her morning routine, her eyes fell on a wooden box tucked into the corner of the small bookcase. It had belonged to her mother for as long as she could remember, an item that Marie never spoke of but always kept close. On impulse, Emma reached for it. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. Her hands trembled as she untied the knot and lifted the first letter. The paper was delicate, yellowed with age, and the handwriting elegant and precise. Dearest Marie, there are no words for how deeply I regret our parting. The circumstances have left me torn, but know that I loved you with everything I had. Yours, Jonathan. Emma's heart pounded as she read the name again and again, disbelief washing over her in waves. Jonathan Reynolds. It was impossible, yet the ink on the page didn't lie. Her father, the man who had never been a part of her life, the man she worked for every day without knowing, was Jonathan Reynolds. The room spun as Emma sat down heavily on the nearest chair. Why had her mother kept this from her? Did Jonathan know? A part of her wanted to crumple the letter, to throw it back in the box and pretend she hadn't found it. But another part, the part that needed answers, wouldn't let her. She looked up as the door to the bedroom creaked open and Marie stepped out, wrapped in her old robe. Emma, is everything okay? Her voice was soft, laced with concern. Emma held up the letter, her hands shaking. Mom, what is this? Marie's eyes widened, her face paling as she took in the sight of the letter. She sank into the chair across from Emma, her eyes misty. I knew this day would come, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Emma's chest ached as she waited, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. I met Jonathan when I was young, Marie continued, staring at the letter as though it were a ghost. We were in love, but life pulled us apart before I ever had the chance to tell him about you. I didn't want you to grow up resenting a father who wasn't there by choice. Emma swallowed hard, the betrayal mixing with empathy as she saw the pain etched into her mother's expression. Does he know now? Marie shook her head slowly. No, I never told him. I didn't think he'd care. Emma leaned back, the weight of the revelation pressing her deeper into the chair. The man who had just accused her of a crime she didn't commit was her father, and he had no idea. The mansion felt different as Emma walked up the path that afternoon. The morning fog clung to the city, wrapping everything in a pale shroud that mirrored her mood. The box of letters was tucked securely in her bag, but her hands still felt cold and clammy as she pushed open the side door. The staff moved around her, busy with preparations and avoiding eye contact. Word had spread about the missing necklace, and everyone was on edge. Emma kept her head down and made her way to Jonathan's study, her heartbeat a drumbeat of nerves. She knocked lightly, and Jonathan's voice called out from within. Come in. Emma stepped inside, the study's dark wood and shelves of books absorbing the light from the wide windows. Jonathan looked up from his desk, his brow creasing as he took in her expression. Emma, he said, setting his pen down. Is something wrong? Emma took a deep breath and closed the door behind her. There's something you need to see. She crossed the room, placing the box on his desk and opening it to reveal the letters. Jonathan's eyes darkened as he reached for the top one, recognition dawning as he read. The room seemed to shrink as he looked up, his voice low and strained. Marie? Emma nodded, her voice trembling. My mother. Jonathan's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something Emma couldn't quite place. Grief, perhaps, or regret. Emma, Before he could finish, the door swung open and Victoria appeared, her face flushed with anger. What's going on in here? Her eyes landed on the box and then on Jonathan's stricken face. What are you two hiding? The tension in the room thickened as Emma braced herself for the storm that was about to break. Victoria's eyes flickered with suspicion as they darted between Emma and Jonathan. The silence in the room stretched thin, so taut it felt like it might snap at any second. Jonathan stood, the letter still clutched in his hand, his expression a mix of regret and resolution. Victoria, Jonathan began, his voice strained. There's something we need to discuss. Victoria's gaze hardened. What could you possibly have to discuss with her? Her words dripped with disdain, and Emma felt her pulse quicken, the thrum of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Jonathan drew in a deep breath, his eyes locking with Victoria's. "This is about my past. About Marie and Emma." Victoria's eyes narrowed, and a chill settled over the room. She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "Marie? The name sounds familiar. Why should I care about some ghost from your past?" Her voice was edged with controlled fury, but beneath it, Emma could sense something else. Fear. Jonathan's face softened, but he didn't back down. "Because Emma isn't just an employee here, Victoria. She's my daughter." The air seemed to freeze, and for a moment, Victoria's mask slipped, revealing shock and disbelief. But it was only a heartbeat before the shock morphed into anger. "Your daughter," she spat, her voice quivering. "How long have you known this?" Emma stood still, her body rigid as she watched the scene unfold. Jonathan shook his head. "I only found out today. I didn't know about Emma until now." Victoria let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and jagged. "So what now? Are we supposed to welcome her with open arms, forgive years of secrets, and pretend everything is fine? Do you know what this will do to us, Jonathan?" Jonathan's eyes flashed with frustration. "This isn't just about us, Victoria. It's about the truth. It's about Emma and the life she's had to live because I wasn't there." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, a rush of emotions she wasn't prepared for. She hadn't come here to unravel the Reynolds marriage, but the truth had a way of cutting deeper than any accusation. Victoria's gaze shifted to Emma, cold and assessing. "And you," she said, her voice low and venomous. "What is it you're after? Money? Recognition?" Emma's jaw tightened, and she fought the urge to look away. "I'm not here for anything but the truth. I only wanted to understand who I am." Victoria's lips thinned into a line, and she turned her glare back to Jonathan. "This changed everything. You know that, don't you?" Jonathan nodded, the weight of his responsibility etched into the lines on his face. "I do?" With a sharp inhale, Victoria spun on her heel and left the room, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hallway. The room fell silent again, and Jonathan turned to Emma, his expression weary. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't deserve this." Emma looked at him, her anger tempered by the sadness in his eyes. "Neither did my mother." The tension in the mansion did not abate with Victoria's departure. If anything, it intensified. The whispers among the staff grew louder, the atmosphere heavy with speculation. Word spread quickly that something significant had shifted in the household, though no one dared speak directly to Emma about it. 2 days later, Emma was cleaning one of the sitting rooms when Rosie appeared at the doorway, her expression anxious. "Emma, you might want to come with me," she said, her voice hushed. Emma's stomach twisted. She set down her dusting cloth and followed Rosie down the hall to the servants' quarters, where a group of maids stood clustered around a window, their faces tight with worry. "What's going on?" Emma asked, glancing outside. At the front entrance of the mansion stood Victoria, speaking animatedly to someone Emma couldn't see. Moments later, a man stepped into view, holding a small notebook and a pen. "A reporter?" "They're here for the story," one of the maids whispered. "About the missing necklace. About everything." Emma's heart sank. The last thing she wanted was for this personal tragedy to become public fodder. The attention could jeopardize everything, not just for her, but for Jonathan and Marie as well. The staff dispersed quickly as Mrs. Davenport, the head housekeeper, approached, her face set in a stern line. "Emma, Mr. Reynolds would like to see you in his study," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Emma's mouth went dry. She nodded and walked the familiar path to the study, her heart pounding. When she stepped inside, Jonathan was seated at his desk, a document spread out in front of him. He looked up, and for a moment, the exhaustion on his face made him seem older than he was. "Emma," he said, motioning for her to sit. "We need to talk." She sat on the edge of the chair, the wood pressing against her back. "Is this about the reporter?" Jonathan nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "Victoria has taken matters into her own hands. She's trying to divert attention from the accusations she made by focusing on the story of us." Emma's eyes widened. You mean she's talking about me? About us? Yes, Jonathan said, leaning forward. But we can control the narrative. I don't want you to be painted as the villain here. Emma clenched her hands together, the anger rising unbidden. Why would she do this? Jonathan's gaze softened. Victoria has always been protective of what she believes is hers. This isn't just about the necklace. It's about power, reputation. But I won't let her ruin your life, Emma. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This man, who had once been a distant employer, was now standing between her and the storm. The thought filled her with conflicting emotions: gratitude, confusion, and a deep-seated ache for what could never be reclaimed. That evening, the mansion was shrouded in a quiet more profound than any Emma had experienced. The staff moved like shadows, barely speaking above whispers. Emma found herself in the library, absently straightening books that were already aligned, when the sound of raised voices drew her attention. She followed the sound down the hall to the drawing room, where Victoria stood by the grand piano, her hands clenched into fists. Jonathan faced her, calm but resolute. "You've crossed a line, Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice steady but sharp. "This isn't just about us anymore." Victoria's eyes blazed with defiance. "Don't you dare lecture me, Jonathan. I did what I had to do to protect this family." Jonathan's expression softened, though it was tinged with regret. "You're not protecting anyone. You're only tearing us apart." Victoria's lips parted as if to argue, but the fight seemed to drain out of her. She looked around the room, taking in the portraits on the walls, the polished furniture, the life she had curated so carefully. For the first time, Emma saw not just the powerful matriarch, but a woman who was afraid of losing everything. With a shuddering breath, Victoria walked toward the door. "Then maybe it's time I go," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. Emma pressed herself against the wall as Victoria passed, the scent of her perfume lingering long after she disappeared down the hallway. Jonathan remained in the drawing room, his head bowed as if the weight of years had finally settled on his shoulders. The following day dawned cold and quiet. Emma awoke to a sliver of sunlight piercing through the gap in her curtains, the warmth a stark contrast to the chill in her bones. The events of the past week still weighed on her, a blur of accusations, revelations, and fractured trust. But today, there was a sense of finality in the air, a strange calm after the storm. Emma dressed in silence, her fingers pausing over the letters she'd placed carefully on her nightstand. They were a reminder of the truth she had uncovered, a truth that had set so much in motion. She tucked them into her bag, unsure of what lay ahead. When she arrived at the Reynolds mansion, the staff was subdued, moving with the kind of tentative energy that follows a dramatic shift. Victoria's departure had left a palpable absence, like a shadow that refused to fade. Emma felt it as she walked through the halls, an emptiness she hadn't expected. Jonathan found her in the morning room, where she was adjusting the fresh-cut flowers. He stood in the doorway for a moment, as if gathering the right words. He looked tired, the kind of tired that etched deeper lines around his eyes. "Emma," he said softly. She turned, meeting his gaze. There was no anger or accusation, just an unspoken understanding between them. "I wanted to talk to you," he continued, stepping into the room, "about everything that's happened." Emma nodded, her fingers brushing the petals absently. "I think we both need that." They sat at the small table by the window, the morning light casting a warm glow over the polished wood. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only with the rustle of leaves outside. "I've spent the last few days thinking about the choices I made," Jonathan began, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just with Victoria, but before that, with your mother. I know my actions, or inaction, cost you and Marie more than I can ever make up for." Emma's throat tightened as she listened. There were no excuses, only a raw honesty that she hadn't expected. She glanced down at her hands, fingers twisting together. "I grew up wondering who my father was. I didn't know why he wasn't there, or if he even knew about me. It was hard, but my mom made sure I never felt unloved." Jonathan's eyes shone with regret. "Your mother deserved more, and so did you. I was young and foolish, but that doesn't absolve me. Now, I want to make things right, if you'll let me." The The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and Emma felt the walls she'd built around her heart start to crack. Trust wasn't something that could be given easily, not after years of absence, but the desire to rebuild was there. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice small, "but I'm willing to try." Jonathan reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. It was tentative, like a truce offered in silence. "That's all I can ask for." In the days that followed, a new rhythm began to settle over the mansion. Without Victoria's constant presence, the household felt different, lighter somehow. The staff whispered less, their movements no longer shadowed by tension. It was as if the mansion itself was beginning to exhale, a deep breath after holding in so much. Jonathan kept his promise. He reached out not only to Emma but to Marie, who was initially hesitant to face the man she once loved. Emma was there when Jonathan arrived at their small apartment, the air between him and Marie thick with decades of unspoken words. "Hello, Marie," Jonathan said, his voice soft, laden with memories. He held a bouquet of sunflowers, their yellow petals bright and hopeful. Marie stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe. She looked older than Emma had ever noticed, the lines around her eyes deeper. But there was still a glimmer of the woman who had once captured Jonathan's heart. "Jonathan," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like a question. He offered a small, tentative smile. "I know this won't fix the past, but I needed to come. For Emma and for us?" Marie's eyes misted over, and she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They sat at the table, Emma watching as the silence stretched and then began to break under the weight of quiet conversation. They spoke of simpler times, shared stories from their youth, moments before life had complicated their paths. Emma listened, a warmth growing in her chest. For the first time, the past felt less like a wound and more like a story that, while painful, could lead to something better. The summer days lengthened, and with them came a cautious rebuilding. Jonathan visited often, his presence shifting from tentative to familiar. He brought books for Marie, ones he remembered she'd loved, and he encouraged Emma to pursue her art with a vigor she hadn't felt in years. One evening he arrived with a large canvas and a set of paints, placing them in the center of their small living room. Emma's eyes widened as she ran her fingers over the brushes, their bristles soft and inviting. "Consider this a new start," Jonathan said, watching her with a hopeful expression. "You deserve to create something that's yours." Emma's heart swelled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She hadn't painted in years, not since before her mother's illness had taken over their lives. But as she sat down and began to blend the colors, she felt something inside her shift, a lightness she had almost forgotten. Marie sat nearby, a soft smile on her lips as she watched her daughter paint. Jonathan stayed too, quiet but present, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. One weekend, Jonathan suggested they visit a small cafe downtown. It was a place he remembered from his youth, one that had once been a favorite spot for him and Marie. The cafe had changed over the years, but still held the same cozy charm. Small tables, checkered tablecloths, and the scent of freshly baked pastries. Marie hesitated at first, the weight of memories pulling at her, but Emma's gentle encouragement helped. They sat at a corner table, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow through the wide window. "It's strange being back here," Marie said, her voice wavering but steady. "It feels like another life." Jonathan nodded, his eyes reflecting the same mix of nostalgia and regret. It was, "But I hope we can build something new from it." Emma watched them, her heart full. She had spent so many years imagining moments like this. Her mother smiling, her father present. And now that it was real, it felt fragile but precious. They talked long into the afternoon, laughter breaking through as they shared old stories. Emma painted their memories in her mind, bright strokes of sunlight and warmth. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was more than enough. As the summer gave way to fall, Emma found herself preparing for her first small gallery exhibition. It was a modest event, held in the back room of a local art studio, but it felt monumental. The paintings she had created told stories of resilience, of finding light in the dark. Jonathan and Marie were there, standing together as proud as any family could be. Emma caught their eye and smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and settled in her heart. She felt their love as a steady presence, a quiet support. When the first guests began to trickle in, Emma felt a surge of nerves. But then Jonathan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," he said, his voice steady. Marie nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "We both know you do." Emma took a deep breath and faced the room, the chatter blending into a soft hum. This was her moment, a culmination of the years that had shaped her and the choices that had led them here. And as the night unfolded, filled with laughter and conversation, Emma knew that while the past was a part of her, it didn't have to define her. The future was hers to paint, one hopeful stroke at a time. The soft glow of dimmed lights cast warm patches across the walls of the small art studio, where Emma's paintings were displayed with careful attention. The scent of paint, mingled with that of fresh flowers and the faint aroma of pastries brought in by the gallery owner, created an inviting atmosphere. Conversations hummed around the room, punctuated by the occasional laugh or murmured admiration for a piece. Emma stood by her largest painting, a sweeping landscape that captured the soft light of dawn breaking over a forest. It was a piece that spoke of quiet resilience, the sun inching its way over the horizon after the longest night. As guests wandered by, a few paused, their eyes tracing the careful brushstrokes before nodding approvingly. "Excuse me, miss." An older woman with silvery hair and a gentle smile stepped forward, her glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "This piece, it feels like hope." Emma's chest tightened with emotion. "That's exactly what I wanted to convey," she said softly. "Thank you." As the evening continued, Emma felt a warm hand rest lightly on her shoulder. She turned to find Jonathan standing beside her, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You've created something truly special, Emma," he said, his voice steady with emotion. She glanced at him, her father, who had once been a distant figure and was now a steadfast presence. The journey to this moment had been filled with questions, revelations, and cautious steps toward trust. It hadn't been easy, and there were still scars that hadn't faded, but moments like this reminded her that healing was possible. Marie joined them, leaning on her cane but standing tall, her eyes bright with pride. "Look at all these people, Emma," she said, sweeping her gaze over the crowd. "They're here because they see what I've always known. You have a gift." Emma smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you. Without both of you." Jonathan reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "We're here now, and we're not going anywhere." The three of them stood together, a small family bound by time and resilience. The room buzzed with life, with new beginnings, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Emma felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The gallery had been open for several hours when a familiar face appeared at the entrance, causing a ripple of whispers among the guests. Emma's heart skipped as she recognized Victoria. Dressed impeccably as always, but with a guarded expression, Victoria stepped inside and paused, her eyes scanning the room. Emma exchanged a glance with Jonathan, who straightened but didn't move away from her side. He met Victoria's gaze with a nod that spoke volumes. Acknowledgement, understanding, and a silent invitation to behave with civility. Victoria approached slowly, her eyes settling on one of Emma's smaller paintings, a portrait of a solitary tree standing against the backdrop of a storm. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to read the story behind it. "This one," she said finally, turning her gaze to Emma. "It's powerful." Emma's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "It's about finding strength when everything around you is in chaos." A flicker of something passed across Victoria's face. Regret, perhaps, or longing. She turned to Jonathan, her eyes softening just a touch. "I heard about the exhibition. I wanted to see it for myself." Jonathan nodded. "I'm glad you came." The silence that followed wasn't as tense as Emma expected. It felt like the air before a storm's last breath, a calm filled with what could be hope or simply an ending. Victoria's gaze met Emma's, and for the first time there was no coldness, only the fragile remnants of pride and loss. "I can't change what I've done," Victoria said, her voice low. "But I can try to understand. This, your art, it's beautiful." Emma's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you." Victoria took one last look at the room before stepping back toward the door. There was no grand gesture, no sudden reconciliation, just a small nod to a future where hostility might no longer thrive. And as the door closed behind her, Emma felt a strange, quiet peace settle within her. The days following the exhibition were filled with a new kind of busyness. Invitations from local galleries trickled in, and Emma found herself considering possibilities she hadn't dared to dream about. The house was no longer just a place of work. It was a home that resonated with laughter and shared stories. One evening, Emma sat in her small studio at home, sketching a new piece inspired by a childhood memory. Marie sat nearby, embroidering a napkin as the soft strains of piano music played from the radio. "Do you remember when we'd sit by the window and watch the storms?" Emma asked, glancing over at her mother. Marie's eyes twinkled with the memory. "I do. You'd tell me that the thunder wasn't scary, just the sky trying to speak." Emma laughed, the sound warm and light. "I guess I always found comfort in finding beauty in unexpected places." Jonathan entered the room then, holding a tray with 3 cups of tea. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a smile. "Never," Marie said, setting down her embroidery. Jonathan handed her a cup before giving one to Emma. He sat on the stool beside Emma's easel, watching her sketch with the quiet awe of a father who was still learning the intricate details of his child's life. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," Jonathan said after a moment. "And I know I can't change the past, but I want to be here for everything that comes next. For both of you." Marie reached over, placing her hand over his. "We're not looking for perfect, Jonathan, just presence. And we have that now." Emma looked up, her eyes meeting his with gratitude. "That's all I need." The room fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of shared stories and promises kept. Emma picked up her brush and dipped it into the paint, adding the final touches to her sketch. It was a portrait of 3 figures standing together, silhouetted against a sky breaking into dawn. For the first time, she felt the weight of the past shift into something lighter. It was part of her story, but it no longer defined her. The future was still unwritten, a canvas waiting for its first brushstroke, and Emma was ready to paint it with the colors of hope and love. The seasons changed, and with them came new beginnings. Emma's artwork began to reach wider audiences, featured in galleries that celebrated young, emerging artists. Her name started to appear in local newspapers. Her story told not just as an artist, but as a testament to resilience and family. Jonathan attended every exhibit, often bringing fresh flowers and proudly introducing Emma to guests. Marie's health improved with the added resources and lessened stress, and she became a familiar face in the art community, known as the mother of the talented Emma Carter. One evening, after a particularly successful showing, Jonathan stood with Emma outside the gallery, the city lights casting a glow on the cobblestones. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Emma smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you, Dad." The word felt natural now, not forced or tentative. It was the culmination of all they had been through, the quiet moments and the painful conversations, the shared laughter and the understanding forged from adversity. They walked home together, their steps in sync, each carrying the memory of what had been and the promise of what was to come. For Emma, the past had finally found its place. Not forgotten, but integrated into a life that was moving forward. She reached out, linking her arm through Jonathan's, and felt Marie's presence as a guiding light beside them. The future stretched ahead, full of unknowns and possibility, and Emma, for the first time, embraced it without fear. Years later, Emma stood in a larger studio, the walls lined with her art and splashes of paint that marked moments of inspiration. She had moved beyond the small exhibitions and now prepared for her first major show in a renowned gallery. Jonathan and Marie, older but vibrant, sat in the front row on opening night, their faces filled with pride. As Emma took the stage to address the crowd, She caught their eyes and felt her heart swell. "This exhibition is called Echoes and Beginnings," she said, her voice steady. "It's about finding strength in the story we carry, and learning that while the past shapes us, it doesn't have to hold us. We are always capable of starting again." The room erupted in applause, but Emma's eyes stayed on the two people who had made everything possible. They nodded, their silent affirmation carrying more weight than words ever could. Emma smiled, stepping down from the stage to stand with them, knowing that no matter what, they were a family that had learned how to turn the hardest parts of their lives into something beautiful. Emma found herself busier than ever after the success of her gallery showing. Requests for commissions trickled in, some from local art enthusiasts and others from private collectors who had been captivated by her work. With each request came a new set of expectations and the creeping doubt that followed her like a shadow. The evenings became a mix of long hours spent at her easel and quiet moments shared with Marie. They would sit in the soft light of their apartment, Emma sketching ideas while Marie recounted stories from her youth. The stories filled the room with a sense of nostalgia that soothed Emma's mind after long days. One evening, Jonathan visited with an idea that caught Emma off guard. He sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea as he spoke. "I've been thinking, Emma," he said, setting down his cup with a thoughtful look. "There's an art retreat upstate that focuses on young artists. They bring in mentors from all over, people who can help you develop further." Emma blinked, surprised. The idea of stepping out of her comfort zone and into a world where her work would be critiqued by strangers was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. "I don't know, Dad. I've never done anything like that before." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes kind but determined. "I think you should. You're talented, and it's time the world sees that." Marie smiled softly from her seat by the window. "He's right, Emma. You've spent so long giving to others. This is your time." The drive upstate was filled with lush landscapes and winding roads that cut through forests still tinged with the warmth of autumn. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her sketchbook balanced on her lap, filled with half-finished drawings and bursts of inspiration she'd had during the drive. The retreat was nestled in a clearing surrounded by tall pines and overlooked a tranquil lake that shimmered under the afternoon sun. The main lodge was made of weathered wood, and its large windows reflected the sky, making it seem part of the landscape. Emma's first day was a whirlwind of introductions. She met other artists, each with their own stories and motivations. There was Liam, a painter with an infectious laugh who specialized in abstract art, and Daniela, a sculptor who spoke in a mix of Spanish and English and had a fierce passion for her craft. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself challenged by critiques she hadn't expected. Her initial paintings were met with praise, but also with questions. What story was she trying to tell? What did she want people to feel when they looked at her work? Liam was the first to push her out of her comfort zone. One evening, as they worked side by side, he glanced over at her canvas. "It's beautiful, Emma, but I don't see you in it. What are you hiding behind those trees and sunsets?" Emma's brush paused mid-stroke. His words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. She had always painted scenes that were safe, landscapes that could be admired without stirring the deeper emotions she kept locked away. The next morning she stood before a blank canvas, the weight of his question pressing on her. Slowly, she began to paint, not what she saw, but what she felt. Her mother's laughter, the echo of Jonathan's regret, the hollow ache of loneliness, and the newfound hope that had started to bloom. Halfway through the retreat, Emma found herself drawn to a secluded part of the grounds where the forest met the edge of the lake. It was quiet there, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the soft lap of water against the shore. One afternoon, as she sat sketching, she noticed another figure approaching. It was Daniela, her expression pensive. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sitting before Emma could answer. They sat in silence for a while before Daniela spoke, her voice thoughtful. "You know, I came here because I wanted to find a way to express everything I couldn't say out loud. But it's harder than I thought." Emma glanced at her, surprised by the confession. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I wonder if the art is enough." Daniela laughed, the sound light and genuine. Art is never just enough. It's everything and nothing at once. But that's why we keep trying. Their conversation that day planted the seed of a friendship that would grow over the remaining weeks. They pushed each other, critiqued each other's work, and laughed over cups of coffee late into the night. Emma found herself more open than she had been in years, and for the first time, she saw herself not just as someone who had overcome, but as someone who was thriving. When the retreat ended, Emma packed her canvases and supplies with a sense of bittersweet pride. The experience had left her changed, bolder, more aware of her voice as an artist. The ride back to Boston was filled with stories of her time away that she shared with Jonathan and Marie, who listened with proud, eager eyes. Back in the city, Emma felt the pull of her familiar routines, but brought with her the lessons learned and the friendships made. The gallery owners who had previously shown interest were now calling with offers for solo exhibitions and collaborative projects. Jonathan and Marie watched as Emma stepped further into the limelight, their support unwavering. For Jonathan, each moment with Emma was a step toward mending years of absence. And for Marie, seeing her daughter embrace life brought a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Emma's success continued to grow in the months following her return from the retreat. The once cramped apartment she shared with Marie now brimmed with life. Rolls of canvas leaning against the walls, jars of brushes and pencils scattered across every surface, and sketches pinned up like pages in a diary. Each piece told a story, not just of beauty, but of the struggles, memories, and triumphs that shaped her. Jonathan visited regularly, often bringing dinner or stopping by just to talk. His presence had become a source of comfort, a steady figure who, though flawed, was determined to be part of her life. One evening he arrived with an unexpected guest, a lawyer with a kind smile and a leather briefcase. "Emma," Jonathan said, his voice tinged with excitement and nerves, "I have something to discuss with you and your mother." Marie, sitting in her usual spot by the window, glanced up with a look of curiosity. Emma exchanged a glance with her mother before nodding for Jonathan to continue. The lawyer stepped forward. "My name is Charles, and I'm here to help facilitate a legal matter on Mr. Reynolds' behalf." Jonathan cleared his throat, shifting from foot to foot. "I've decided to create a trust for you, Emma. One that ensures your future and your mother's, no matter what." The room fell silent. Emma's heart thudded in her chest, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You don't have to do this," she said, though the emotion in her voice belied her words. Jonathan smiled softly, his eyes reflecting a deep sincerity. "I know I don't, but I want to. It's long overdue. I've spent enough time regretting what I didn't do. This is my way of showing you both that I'm here now, and I'm staying." Marie's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she reached for Emma's hand. "It's a generous gift, Jonathan, one that will change so much for us." Emma's voice was steadier when she spoke again. "Thank you, Dad." The lawyer outlined the details, but the words blurred as Emma's thoughts raced. The trust meant stability and the freedom to pursue her art without fear. It meant Marie would be taken care of, even if their fortunes changed. The conversation wound down, and Charles left with the promise of following up in the coming days. As the door clicked shut behind him, Jonathan remained, an unspoken question in his eyes. "Stay for dinner?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. Jonathan's face relaxed, and he nodded. "I'd like that." 2 weeks later, Emma's gallery was abuzz with excitement as she prepared for the opening of her new collection, titled Shadows and Light. The paintings were deeply personal, capturing moments of raw emotion. Her mother's quiet strength, Jonathan's tentative re-entry into her life, and even memories of the mansion that had once been a place of tension. On the day of the exhibit, familiar faces gathered in the brightly lit gallery, their voices blending into a symphony of admiration and curiosity. Marie was there, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes, her smile proud and unwavering. Jonathan stood nearby, talking with a few patrons who had recognized him from newspaper stories about Boston's prominent families. As Emma greeted visitors, a figure appeared at the edge of the room that made her heart skip. It was Victoria, dressed impeccably as always, but with an air of hesitation that was unfamiliar. She held herself with the same poise, but her eyes searched the room, landing on Emma with something that could almost be called regret. Emma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to approach. The room seemed to quiet as they stood face to face, the distance between them filled with years of misunderstandings and moments of silent tension. "Victoria," Emma said, keeping her voice calm. "I didn't expect to see you here." Victoria's gaze softened, and she nodded. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I've seen your work in the papers. I wanted to see it for myself." Emma looked at her, searching for the cold, calculating woman she had known, but found only a glimmer of something human. "Thank you for coming." Victoria's eyes moved to a painting that depicted the mansion, its stone facade cast in the pale light of morning. She took a step closer, her voice low. This place was more than just a house, wasn't it? It held so much for all of us. Emma followed her gaze, nodding. "It did, but we're all more than what happened there." A small, sad smile appeared on Victoria's lips. "I know I can't change the past, Emma, but I hope one day we can find some sort of understanding." Emma's chest tightened with the weight of words unsaid, but she nodded, accepting the offer as a tentative piece. "Maybe we can." They stood in silence for a moment longer, before Victoria turned and walked to another part of the gallery, leaving Emma with a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Life settled into a new kind of normal for Emma. She and Marie moved into a larger apartment, one with a spare room that Emma transformed into a sunlit studio. Jonathan visited often, each time with stories from his youth or small gifts he thought Emma might like: a rare paintbrush set, a book on art history, or an old photograph of Marie that he had found in a forgotten album. One evening, as the autumn leaves fell in a blaze of orange and red, Emma decided to host a dinner. The guest list was small: Jonathan, Marie, Rosie from the mansion, and even Daniela, who had stayed in touch after the retreat. The table was set with simple elegance, candles casting a warm glow over plates of home-cooked food. Laughter filled the air, stories mingling as the night unfolded. Emma watched the people around her, the family she had cobbled together from unexpected places, and felt a sense of belonging she had once thought impossible. Jonathan lifted his glass, catching everyone's attention. "To Emma," he said, his voice filled with pride, "for showing us all that it's never too late to find your place." Marie nodded, her eyes misty as she raised her own glass. "And to second chances?" The clinking of glasses resonated through the room, a quiet symphony that marked the end of old wounds and the start of something new. Emma took a sip of her wine, the warmth spreading through her chest as she looked around. The future was still uncertain, filled with challenges and moments that would test her resolve. But for now, surrounded by laughter and love, she knew she had everything she needed to face whatever came next. And as the night deepened, filled with the soft sounds of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter, Emma allowed herself to dream, not just of the next painting or the next gallery, but of a life where she continued to create, heal, and love, one day at a time. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was more than the shadows she had walked through. She was the light that had come after, the new stories she was yet to tell. The weeks following the dinner were filled with the kind of everyday moments that Emma had once longed for. Mornings in the new apartment were peaceful, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and casting warm patches on the wooden floors. Marie would hum softly as she prepared tea, her movements steady and sure. Emma would wake to the comforting scent of chamomile, ready to face each new day with fresh resolve. Jonathan became a regular part of their routine. He would stop by on his way to the office, sometimes just for a few minutes to drop off pastries or bring a newspaper clipping about art exhibitions he thought Emma might find interesting. Their conversations grew from awkward pleasantries to deeper, more meaningful talks about their pasts and the hopes they held for the future. One morning, Jonathan brought with him an old leather-bound journal. He set it on the kitchen table, and Emma eyed it curiously. The cover was cracked, the edges worn with time. "I found this in my study," Jonathan said, his voice soft. "It was my father's, but there are entries that mention my mother's love for art. I thought you might like to read it. Maybe there's something in here that'll inspire you." Emma's fingers brushed over the cover, feeling the weight of history embedded in its pages. She glanced at Jonathan, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I'd love to read it." As Jonathan sipped his coffee, they fell into an easy silence, one that spoke of the growing trust between them. The journal would become Emma's late-night companion, its pages filled with the musings of a man she'd never met, but who had loved art with the same fervor she did. It was a reminder that creativity and resilience ran deep in their family, even if the connections had been lost along the way. Emma's life outside of her art blossomed as well. Daniela had stayed in Boston after the retreat, drawn to the city's energy and the opportunities it offered. The two friends would meet at a cafe once a week, sketching together or trading stories about their latest projects. "Tell me," Daniela said one afternoon, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "what's next for Emma Carter, Boston's rising star?" Emma laughed, a sound that felt as natural as breathing. "I'm not sure. I've been thinking about teaching a few classes, maybe workshops for kids or teenagers." Daniela's expression softened. "That's perfect. You have a way of making people feel seen, Emma. Sharing that would be incredible." The idea of teaching excited Emma in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about showcasing her own work anymore. It was about inspiring others to find their voices, just as she had. She spent the next few weeks planning, talking with local art centers, and gathering supplies. Her first workshop was a small one, held in a community center with walls painted in bright, welcoming colors. The students ranged from eager children with paint-smeared hands to teenagers who kept their sketches close until they felt brave enough to share. Emma felt a rush of joy guiding them through techniques and watching their faces light up as their creations took shape. After the session, as the students filed out, one young girl with pigtails lingered. She held out a piece of paper, eyes wide with both shyness and hope. On it was a drawing of a house surrounded by trees, with figures that looked like a family standing in front. "It's for you," the girl said, her voice small. Emma's chest tightened as she accepted the drawing. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's beautiful." The girl beamed before darting out of the room, leaving Emma holding a reminder of why she painted and why sharing her gift mattered. One Sunday morning, Emma found Marie sitting at the dining table, papers spread out in front of her, and a look of concentration on her face. Emma set her cup of coffee down, glancing at the neat handwriting that covered the pages. "What's all this?" she asked. Marie looked up with a soft smile. "I've been writing," she said, tapping the pages gently. "Stories from my past, memories, moments that I wanted to capture while I still can." Emma's eyes softened. "You're writing your memoir?" "Something like that," Marie said, her eyes twinkling. "There's so much that I want you to know, not just about the hardships, but the moments of joy, the laughter, the love. It's part of our story, Emma, and I think it's time to share it." Emma leaned over, skimming a few lines and recognizing stories she'd heard only in fragments, the way her mother had once sung in a small cafe for spare change, or the time she'd won a local art contest as a teenager, but never claimed the prize because she couldn't afford the bus fare to the award ceremony. "You're amazing," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't wait to read all of it." Jonathan came by that afternoon, and when Emma mentioned Marie's memoir, he looked at Marie with an expression filled with respect. "I'd love to read it too, if you'd let me." Marie hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Maybe when it's done." They sat together that afternoon, the air filled with the warm comfort of family. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments that felt raw, and wounds that ached when touched. But it was real, and it was theirs. Emma's art continued to gain traction, and one day, an unexpected email arrived. It was from the curator of a well-known New York City gallery, inviting her to join a group exhibition. The theme was Echoes of the Past, a perfect fit for her work. The prospect of showing her art in New York was daunting, but excitement bubbled under the nerves. She called Jonathan and Marie to share the news, their cheers over the phone filling her with confidence. The next month was a flurry of activity. Emma worked tirelessly, choosing pieces that told her story, paintings that captured both the darkness and the light she had experienced. Jonathan and Marie insisted on joining her for the trip, eager to see this new chapter unfold. When they arrived in New York, the city's energy was palpable. The night of the exhibit, Emma stood in the gallery surrounded by paintings that represented years of struggle, healing, and hope. Jonathan and Marie stood beside her, their support steady and unwavering. As guests filed in, admiring the art, a man approached Emma. He introduced himself as a critic for a prominent arts magazine, his gaze thoughtful as he examined her work. "You've captured something unique here," he said. "There's a raw honesty that's rare. What inspired you?" Emma glanced at Jonathan and Marie, who watched her with pride. She turned back to the critic, a small smile playing on her lips. "Life," she said. "The past, the present, and the hope for the future." The critic nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I'll be watching to see what you do next." As the night wore on and the gallery buzzed with conversation and admiration, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and full of unexpected turns, but she had found her voice and a family who stood by her. The future, uncertain and full of promise, was hers to shape, and for the first time, Emma felt ready to embrace every part of it. The week after the exhibition in New York was a whirlwind of phone calls, congratulations, and offers. Emma had returned to Boston with Marie and Jonathan, but her mind buzzed with the possibilities opening up before her. The critic's review had been published and was overwhelmingly positive, calling her work an emotional journey woven with authenticity and hope. Emma sat in her studio, staring out the window as the city moved beneath her. It was a chilly morning, the sky streaked with the first hint of winter. Marie was sitting in the next room, reading through a bound draft of her memoir, occasionally making notes in the margins. Jonathan had gone back to his usual routine, but made a point to visit in the evenings, each time bringing warmth and stories from his day. The phone rang, snapping Emma out of her reverie. She reached for it, surprised to hear the voice of Claire Morrison, the New York Gallery curator. "Emma, I'm glad I caught you," Claire said, her voice bright. "We've received a wonderful response to your work, and I'd love to discuss a solo exhibition here next year." Emma's breath caught. A solo exhibition in New York was a dream she hadn't even dared to form fully. She swallowed, the room spinning with possibilities. "I'd be honored, Claire. Thank you for the opportunity. Let's set up a time to talk details," Claire continued. "I believe this is just the beginning for you, Emma." As she hung up, Emma felt the weight of both excitement and fear settle over her. The chance to show her work on a grander scale was thrilling, but it also brought the unknown, the pressures of success, the judgment of a larger audience. She would need the strength and support that had brought her this far. Marie looked up from her manuscript, sensing the change in the room. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes kind and curious. Emma crossed the room and sat next to her mother, taking the manuscript in her hands. The pages were filled with stories that had shaped them both, written in Marie's elegant script. "I just got invited to do a solo show in New York." Marie's eyes widened, a smile breaking across her face. "Emma, that's incredible! You deserve this. You've worked so hard." Emma nodded, the reality settling in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without Dad?" The word felt more natural every time she used it, a testament to how far they'd come. Marie's smile softened. "And we're not going anywhere. You'll have us by your side, every step of the way." The next few months were a blur of activity. Emma's days were filled with painting, meeting with gallery owners, and arranging logistics for the upcoming show. She found herself drawn to themes of resilience and transformation, creating pieces that told the story of rebuilding after loss. Each brushstroke felt like a letter to her past self, a reminder of the girl who had once thought her dreams were beyond reach. One evening, Jonathan joined Emma in her studio. The room was warm from the lamps, the scent of oil paint and varnish lingering in the air. He watched as she worked, the movements of her brush precise and full of intention. "Can I ask you something?" he said, breaking the silence. Emma paused, looking over her shoulder. "Of course." He stepped closer, his gaze drifting over the nearly finished piece on the easel. It depicted a figure standing on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by storm clouds that parted to reveal a clear sky. "What does this one mean to you?" Emma set down her brush, wiping her hands on a cloth. "It's about fear," she said after a moment. "And the moment you realize you can move past it, that what's behind you doesn't define what's ahead." Jonathan's eyes met hers, filled with understanding. "I'm proud of you, Emma. More than words can say." A warmth spread through her at his words. The silence that followed wasn't empty, but full. An acknowledgement of shared experiences and the journey they'd taken to get here. The day of the solo exhibition arrived on a crisp winter evening. Snowflakes drifted down in soft flurries, coating the city in a layer of white that sparkled under the streetlights. The gallery was filled with patrons bundled in coats, their breath visible in the cold before they stepped inside. Emma stood near the entrance, a black dress hugging her frame, her hair pinned back elegantly. Marie and Jonathan arrived together, their eyes lighting up when they saw her. Jonathan was beaming, and Marie's smile was wide enough to reach her eyes. "You look stunning, sweetheart," Marie said, giving Emma a gentle squeeze. Jonathan nodded in agreement, his pride evident. "Thank you, both of you," Emma said, feeling her nerves settle just a bit. "I'm glad you're here." As the gallery filled, familiar and unfamiliar faces alike paused before Emma's paintings, their conversations blending into a soft hum. Emma caught sight of Daniela, who waved from across the room, a grin splitting her face. Rosie had come too, dressed in her Sunday best, her expression one of unfiltered joy. The curator, Claire Morrison, stepped up to the podium at the center of the gallery, tapping the microphone to call for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for this special event. We are proud to present the work of Emma Carter, an artist whose story of resilience and hope has touched many." Applause filled the room, and Emma felt her cheeks warm. She stepped forward, taking the microphone from Claire with a shaky breath. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steadying as she spoke. "Each painting in this room is a piece of my story. Stories of loss, discovery, and the journey toward healing. But they're not just mine. They're the stories of everyone who's ever felt broken and found the courage to rebuild." She glanced at Jonathan and Marie, their eyes misty but proud, and felt her heart swell. This show is as much about finding light as it is about embracing the shadows. And I hope that, as you look around, you find a piece of your own story reflected back at you. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Emma stepped down, breathless and exhilarated. Jonathan wrapped her in a hug as soon as she reached him, his voice low in her ear. "You did it, Emma, and it's only the beginning." Marie's eyes glistened as she took Emma's hands. "You've always been my light, even in the darkest times, and now the world gets to see it too." As the night continued and conversations ebbed and flowed around her, Emma felt the weight of the past shift further into the distance. The future was bright and unknown, but she was ready for it. The following weeks were filled with an outpouring of interest in Emma's work. Invitations to collaborate, requests for interviews, and commissions flooded in. But through it all, she remained grounded, anchored by the people who had walked through the fire with her. Emma took time to teach more workshops, sharing her knowledge and inspiring the next generation of artists. One day, after a particularly lively class, a teenage girl lingered behind. She reminded Emma of herself, a quiet determination behind shy eyes. "Miss Carter, how do you know when a painting is finished?" the girl asked, her voice tentative. Emma smiled, thinking of the countless times she'd asked herself the same question. "When it feels true," she said. "When it feels like you've told the story you needed to tell." The girl nodded thoughtfully, and Emma felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond her own achievements. She had found her voice and was now helping others find theirs. Years later, Emma stood in her studio, now filled with works from over the years. Some were recent, bright with color and confidence, while others were older, holding shadows and echoes of the journey that had brought her here. Marie sat by the window, her hair now a soft gray, reading a magazine that featured Emma on the cover. Jonathan entered the room, a slight limp in his step, but a smile on his face. "I see your latest commission is coming along," he said, nodding toward the easel. Emma laughed, wiping a speck of paint from her cheek. "It's getting there." Marie looked up from her magazine, her eyes twinkling. "Every masterpiece takes time." Emma turned, taking in the scene. The light streaming through the window, her parents' familiar presence, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. The past had taught her resilience, the present gave her purpose, and the future was a canvas yet to be filled. And as she picked up her brush to add another stroke, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, marked by moments that painted the story of Emma's life with vibrant new colors. Her studio became a gathering place for artists, friends, and family. The once quiet space that had seen her deepest struggles now buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the joy of shared creativity. Marie's health fluctuated with time, but her spirit remained resilient. She often joined Emma during her workshops, reading passages from her memoirs to captivated audiences. The stories of her past, once private and painful, became a testament to survival and love. Young artists would linger afterward, inspired not just by Emma's paintings, but by the legacy of the stories that her family carried. Jonathan, true to his word, remained a steadfast presence. His visits turned into stays, and eventually he moved into a nearby apartment, close enough to be part of Emma's daily life. Their relationship, once fragile and new, became something solid and cherished. He attended every art opening, workshop, and community event that Emma participated in, always there with a warm smile and words of encouragement. One spring day, when the cherry blossoms dusted the streets in delicate pink petals, Emma received an invitation from a prestigious art museum in Boston. They wanted to host a retrospective of her work, an exhibit that would span her entire career, from her earliest pieces to her latest creations. The announcement of the exhibit drew attention far and wide. The opening night was to be a grand event, with guests including artists, critics, and admirers who had followed Emma's journey from the beginning. On the evening of the exhibition, the museum was a sea of familiar and new faces, the air humming with anticipation. Emma stood near the entrance, wearing a simple gown that let her art speak louder than her presence. She felt a surge of gratitude as she looked around. Marie, seated in a place of honor, smiled warmly at her, pride radiating from her eyes. Jonathan stood nearby, shaking hands with old acquaintances and new admirers alike. As guests wandered through the exhibit, they encountered Emma's progression as an artist and a person. There were paintings from her days as a maid, scenes inspired by quiet moments shared with her mother, and pieces that depicted the tumultuous path to reconnecting with her father. Each painting was a chapter in the story of her life, a testament to the battles fought and won. At the center of the exhibit was a new piece titled Echoes and Beginnings. It showed a trio standing on the crest of a hill at dawn. Emma, Marie, and Jonathan, painted in soft hues that suggested warmth and light. It was a tribute to family, resilience, and the journey that had brought them here. Claire Morrison, who had become a close friend over the years, stepped up to the podium to address the crowd. Tonight, we celebrate not just the art of Emma Carter, but the story she tells with each brushstroke. Her work reminds us that even in our darkest times, there is light to be found if we are brave enough to search for it. The audience broke into applause, and Claire motioned for Emma to step forward. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself as she walked to the microphone. The faces before her, some familiar, some strangers, were lit with admiration and curiosity. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Emma began, her voice strong but laced with emotion. "This exhibit is a collection of moments, each one a reminder that life is not just about where we come from, but about the people we choose to become. My story is not unique. It's shared by many who have faced loss, rediscovered love, and found strength they didn't know they had." She glanced at Marie, who nodded encouragingly, and then at Jonathan, who met her eyes with a tearful smile. "I owe so much to the people who have stood by me, to my mother, who taught me that love endures even in the hardest times, and to my father, who reminded me that it's never too late to try. The room was silent, each person listening with rapt attention. Emma's heart swelled as she continued. Art is not just what we create. It's what we carry with us. It's in the stories we share. Pieces of your own reflected back. As the applause erupted, Emma stepped down, enveloped in the warmth of the moment. Daniela appeared beside her, pulling her into a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered. "You've shown the world who you are." In the quiet of the night, after the crowd had thinned and the museum had emptied, Emma stood alone in front of echoes and beginnings. Jonathan joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "I never imagined this," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "But I'm so glad I'm here to see it." Emma leaned into him, the weight of the past feeling lighter than ever. "Me too, Dad." Marie approached, her steps slow but sure. She took Emma's hand in hers, the three of them standing in a moment that felt timeless. The lights above dimmed, leaving the painting softly illuminated. Emma gazed at it, seeing not just the figures, but the lives they had led. The battles, the love, the relentless hope that had pushed them forward. The future stretched before them, full of days yet to be painted, stories yet to be told. And as they turned to leave, Emma felt the gentle nudge of inspiration, already thinking of what she would create next. Because life, she knew, was a canvas of endless beginnings. As the final chapter of Emma's journey closes for now, we hope you felt inspired by her story of resilience, love, and new beginnings. If you enjoyed this story and want to join us for more tales that touch the heart and celebrate the human spirit, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any future stories that might resonate with you or bring a little lighter to your day. Thank you for watching, and remember, life is full of stories waiting to be shared, so stay tuned for more.